Hey there, business builders. Have you ever wondered how you could use market insights to drive your business growth? Well, in today's episode, we're exploring the value of marketing insights. We'll be discussing our top strategies for gaining these insights and how to utilize them in your business to make better strategic decisions. Well, welcome to the Business Builders Podcast. We are your hosts. I am Brenton Gowland.
And I'm Ron Tomlian.
And Ron, we've been covering marketing for a while now, so I think we've almost done every aspect of marketing, do you think?
Well, marketing's a big subject, and I think we'll have to revisit it when we get some feedback about what aspects we haven't covered. But I think today I'd like to cover an area of marketing or role of marketing that's often not considered or forgotten about.
Okay, what area is that?
Here's the thing. Most people think about marketing as taking the organization or taking your products and services out to the marketplace. And that's a very important part of marketing. But I think as important, if not more important, and certainly a more fundamental aspect of the role of marketing is to bring the customer into the organization. Some people call it the customer advocate. And I certainly know that in roles that I've had, that's been the harder part of the job.
Customer advocates.
Is to bring an understanding, a realization of what's important to the customer into the organization. Because let's be fair, whether you're a one-man band or whether you're a large organization, you start to get a perspective that's your own. You start to, the Americans talk about drinking your own Kool-Aid. You start to believe your own perspective on the world, and it's not often the perspective that is important to your customers.
Yeah.
So bringing that perspective in is really important.
That's interesting. I've been listening to, I must admit here, a few of the Jordan Peterson kind of things that he's been saying. And one of the key thing that stuck with me out of his book, I know this is a strange insight, but it takes a tribe to form a mind, right? Because it takes multiple perspectives to bring balance to us as individuals.
And you've just hit the nail right on the head. It's insight.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it's easier than ever to get data. We're inundated with data. And it's easier than ever to analyze that data. You can even get AI to do that sort of stuff for you now. But the important thing is not to focus on the data, I think. It's in order to bring the customer in, you need to understand what the data is telling you. You need to have what I call marketing insight. And a nice definition of what's a marketing insights, your capacity to gain an accurate and deep understanding of your market and the players in it. But when we were talking about this before the show, that's a nice definition. You talked about a much more understandable version of what an insight is. So tell me more about that.
Okay. Firstly, I'll say, I don't think it's not understandable what you're saying. Obviously, an insight is based on learning what's going on in the market so that we can change our behaviors or our activities accordingly based on having an insight. But I like to, and we've talked about this a bit, we like to put things in a terminology that makes it really clear to understand to a 4-year-old. If you can't explain it to a 4-year-old, it's saying that, well, maybe you don't know the subject. But I often look at things like business is like a person. It has a personality. We talked about branding a lot. Branding is what people say about you when you're not around. Well, with your group of friends, people talk about you when you're not around, don't they? So if you imagine if you go to a barbecue and there's the conversation you're having, but then there's the conversations people have had where they think about you in a certain way. Now, an insight is where one of your trusted friends might come and tell you, well, I've got to tell you, this is what's being said about you behind your back, or this is what's going on, or your friend might pull you aside, or you might be at the barbecue and someone might not just tell you about your behavior, but something that's going on in someone else's life that makes you realize something about how you should act with that person. For example, someone in your friendship circle might have been acting really strange lately in behavior that you might think, God, I don't know if I want to spend time with that person anymore. And then someone tells you, well, do you actually understand that their mother's become really sick and they're having to care for them and this is happening? Now, I'm making this up. This is fictitious. But you've then got an insight into that person that means you see them in a different way, right? And then you act in a different way towards them. The insight modifies your behavior or might affect your behavior is a better way to say it. And if it's an insight about yourself, it might help you become more effective in that group, more liked, because being liked is really good, because if we're liked and we know that people in our group are able to do things, we can get more done because we can tap a few people on the shoulder and say, hey, I need to do this. You get the point though.
You can influence.
The insight is learning something you didn't otherwise already know outright, but you get it confirmed. And that insight gives you the ability to change, modify your behavior, or develop a way of doing things that makes you either more effective, better liked, or able to understand someone that you're interacting with more. The insight is incredibly valuable. And it comes from friends.
And it's the same with organizations.
Yes.
Yeah. The end point of all this doing things in the marketplace or marketing is to be more effective at influencing customers and getting them to change their behaviors towards your product versus others. Really, to solve those customers' problems more effectively.
Yes.
That's what we're all about. So how do you do that? You need to have insight into what those problems are, what's influencing the behaviors of customers at the moment. So you need a deeper understanding of those customers. And that's where the whole idea of insight comes from. It's not just the raw data. It's what the data tells you.
There's that saying, how many times have you heard someone saying, I just wish I had a crystal ball?
Oh, yeah. See the future.
See, I think that's again what you're saying, because it's like being able to see the road ahead in more clarity than you can now.
What's interesting is the developing marketing insights has a number of advantages. One of those is I understand my customers now, what their wants are, what their needs are. And they're different. And what they think about my product and products of other people. So a deeper understanding of what's going on, what their problems are. But it's also about anticipating the future. What are the trends? What will be problems that customers have in the future, so that I can see whether I can do something about solving those problems, whether what I have to offer can solve problems that maybe people haven't even identified at the moment. And here's the thing. People often go out to talk to people in the marketplace and say, what solution are you looking for?
Yes.
It's the wrong question. The question should be, what problems are you having in this area? Because people can very easily identify what their problems are. You talk to somebody, they love to talk about their problems.
That's true.
Yeah. The solutions to those problems are more elusive, and they might not even know what the potential solutions are or what could be solutions into the future. They're not experts in that area. All they know is their problems, and they can articulate them well. They can articulate their perspective. Funnily enough, there's some famous examples of things like the iPod, the development of the old iPod before the iPad. They didn't say, hey, what solution are you looking for in terms of playing your music? The people at Apple talked to their customers about what problems are you having? And they were having problems with the Walkman and the disc Walkman because the shuffle problems and things moving around and not having enough of a selection in one CD or one, in the old days, one cassette. So people were articulating, these are the things that are problematic about what I've got at the moment. They weren't talking about solutions to that problem. They maybe haven't even thought about them. It was when the people at Apple understood what problems people were having.
They got an insight.
They got an insight. They said, well, there is actually technology that we can employ to do something about this. And in fact, it wasn't even their technology. It was the first MP3 player was actually developed by another company altogether. But the people at Apple were able to see the benefit of that technology to apply it to the problems that people had. And that's an insight.
Yeah. So we talk about the 4 Ps of marketing, right? People, product, place, price. And we've talked about in past episodes that product is often influenced, or should be influenced by the marketing department, but the marketing department is often, as Tanya was saying the other week, the colouring in department might be seen internally. Yeah. Or it might be seen as just doing promotions and so forth, but influencing product. And I shared a story which really illustrates exactly this Apple scenario you just talked about, but that was the coffee pod machine. So the way they worked out or developed that product was by filming people and talking to people as well, but filming them in their kitchen environments and noticing that the key thing from the coffee machines, because why do people not buy coffee machines in such a vast quantity, or why do they stop using them? Why do they stop buying coffee? And they found out that after watching people over time, it was the mess that the coffee grounds create that was causing people drama, always cleaning up coffee grounds. And look, to be honest, I'm a perfectionist a bit, so I've got an actual coffee machine here with the plunger and the lever and all that kind of thing because I like to be like a little in-house barista, but I'm always cleaning up coffee grounds. But they observed this, worked that out, and they developed the coffee pod machines. What does a coffee pod machine not have is mess.
Mess and coffee grounds, yeah.
That's right. You got a new way of having to clean it. But that's how they developed the product. They got an insight, and it's been massively successful. Every second business I walk into has a coffee pod machine.
It creates its own problem in terms of disposal of the pods. But
you got to buy the pods all the time.
Yeah. But that's another problem. And people are coming up with innovative ways like compostable coffee pods.
Yeah.
But that's another problem. But it solves the first problem.
Well, it's created a product that's had a lot of uptake. So that's a huge thing.
We often talk about return on investment for marketing. And the whole idea of marketing is not to talk to everyone. It's to talk to the people who need or want the product and service you have. So how do you focus your marketing efforts? It's in particular marketing promotion efforts. Well, that's understanding what the mechanisms that the customers use, the most effective channels to market, using a marketing jargon term, the media that they consume, the most effective touch points, the type of messaging. You don't get that. You don't get those insights by just guessing.
That's correct.
You can by trial and error.
But boy, that's an expensive way of doing it.
But yeah, the trial and error is a valid thing too, though.
Oh, it is if you're willing to. If you do it quick and you do it cheaply.
Well, if you use insights to do your trial and error, it ends up being a better scenario.
Absolutely. So anticipating future trends, optimizing your marketing, understanding what makes you different.
Yeah, 100%.
In the eyes of your customers and potential customers. That's an insight. That's an insight you should be looking for.
All of these insights are important, but the one thing people might be able to relate to better is because, we often want to sell our products quicker and find marketing campaigns or ways of doing things. Do you remember that campaign from the States, Got Milk? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
So the whole thing with that is milk sales were going down in the States in a big way. I watched some documentary on it years back, if I can remember all the details properly. But anyway, the key thing I understood from that is when they just came up with this campaign, it was simply got milk. And they had different scenarios where they used that slogan and they made it a bit funny as well. But people in their house opening the fridge, no milk, got milk, all that kind of stuff. But the insight was that milk was one of those things when you ran out of it, you kind of go, oh, I should really have milk in the fridge. Even myself last night, I had to work late. I went to the fridge to make a cup of tea and I opened the fridge and there was no milk there. I was like, oh, I forgot to buy milk. And it was just based on that simple insight and it turned their sales around incredibly. But would they have thought about that right from the get-go? Oh, milk's better like this. Oh, milk's better like this. We'll advertise this health benefit. Oh, it's A2 milk. It's this. No, it was simple. Got milk.
And that comes back to an insight into what is the fundamental problem that our customers are having.
Correct. And it might not be the thing we think it is.
This is, I think, really important. And we're going to talk about it later. How do we get these insights? It's worthwhile using the knowledge you have at the moment and differentiating between what I think and what knowledge I have. And what I mean by that is knowledge is something that you can know and is a fact. Okay. Your opinion or your perspective might be useful to lead you towards that knowledge, but at the end of the day, unless it's verified, it's not really knowledge. This is the scientific approach. So I think a good starting point, how do you develop these insights, is to ask yourself, what do I think is going on around me?
So start off with
your framework of how this market operates, and don't rely just on yourself. Use the people in your organization. What's important to customers? What are they thinking at the moment? And then verify that.
Yeah, okay. That's almost a testing method.
Yeah, well, it's exactly what it is. People often talk about, you have to jump straight to market research. And when they think about market research, they think about surveys. And there's plenty of mechanisms you can use nowadays to do surveys. But surveys are the second step. Surveys should be used once you have a hypothesis of what's going on. And your hypothesis of what's going on, it might be that you really don't understand the situation.
Mm.
So you need to talk to people. Now, there's various ways of doing that, but qualitative research is often what market researchers will suggest you start with, so that you can then, once you've got this hypothesis, this is what's going on, let's test it.
So let's just define firstly, there's two types of research that we talk about, right? And that's qualitative, like you've just said, and quantitative. And quantitating is all about numbers. So numbers are easy. That's a survey on a scale of 1 to 10. What do you think of this? But qualitative is a little bit harder to define in that it's asking potentially specific questions, but giving the participants who you're talking to the opportunity to say anything.
Yes. It's more about asking open-ended questions.
Yeah.
What do you think about? Tell me your perspective on.
Because you're
Tell
wanting
me more about that.
Because you're wanting to explore what they think.
Exactly. It's exploratory research is another way that it's described. It's qualitative because there aren't quantifications, but you can start to see some of our customers are saying this.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be done through research. I think for smaller organizations who will say, I can't afford research. And I've been in those sort of organizations. I remember going to one organization, we had 15 people in it, and I'd come from a very large organization with 6,000 people in it. And the first thing I asked, having been a marketer and now the CEO, I asked about what our research budget was. And after people picked themselves off the floor laughing, they said, it's about as big as our marketing budget, which is zero.
Yeah.
So we had to have innovative ways. We didn't have the money to go out and do research like I'd been used to before. We had to find innovative ways to get that information, get those insights. And that means talking to people.
But can I just say as well, we started at the start of this episode talking about the fact that we've been talking about marketing for a while. And we're talking to business builders, people who want to develop themselves in order to develop their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But the reason we talk about marketing for so long, everyone who's listening, is it's so important. And the thing that I'm passionate about is seeing marketing find its place. So when you talk about the marketing budget being zero, I'm really hoping, and the research budget, I'm really hoping that people see this in a different way as we progress. But massively important what you've said, because let's take Australia. What percentage of businesses are under 15 people?
I would say probably 90% of businesses.
Yeah, it's really, really high. I can't remember the exact figures. I used to remember them, but businesses that are 2, 3, 4, 5 people are 30, 40% of the businesses in Australia. 5 to about 15 is probably the next 20%, and then 15 to 50 is probably the next 10%. And then as you go higher towards having businesses that are 1,000 plus people, they're in the 1%.
Oh, yeah. So, the important thing is that people often think, I can't do this stuff because I can't afford to hire a researcher in. And that's valid, but it doesn't mean you don't do it.
But what is research?
Yeah,
Let's go back to the barbecue scenario.
Yeah.
It's asking someone, hey, what do you think of this situation? It's just talking to your client. So any business can do it. A business of 1 can do it. A business of 5 can do it. Then there might not be a budget with a business of 1. There might be a small budget with a business of 5. But it's about talking to people and then going down and away and writing the key things you've learned.
Absolutely. And having a place, and we've talked about this before, having a place a repository for that information.
Yes.
And using it to have discussions within the business about what's important to customers.
Yes.
And as I said before, an important role of marketing, whether it's someone's responsibility or a group's responsibility, an important role for your marketing within an organization is to bring that information into the core of the decision-making for the organization, into the core of what's important to us. What's important to the customer has to be what's important to us. So how do we get that information? How do we get that knowledge?
Yeah. The interesting thing is, why is it important to us? It's because it's important to the customer. And that's what you were starting to talk about at the beginning, that the aspect of marketing that we haven't been talking about is bringing the customer into the center of the business and what they think. Making it about what they think more than what we think.
Because the purpose of any business is to do something useful for the customer, help solve their problems. Well, you can't do that unless you know what those problems and their perspective and insights
So it's
are.
massively important to gain insights and constantly be looking for insights so that you can act upon them and not be blind.
We started this whole conversation by talking about how ubiquitous data is, and it's so much more available. It's so much easier to gather. It's so much easier to analyze than ever was before. I think one of the things that people forget is that having all this data and being able to do all this analysis, if it doesn't lead to an insight, because it does cost you to get it, maybe less than it ever has before.
It's like having a marketing plan sitting on the table and doing nothing with it. If you've got a bunch of information sitting there and you don't do something with it, well, what's the point?
So a really important technique, I think, in all of this, and it's the simplest technique, but it's hugely beneficial, is to be curious.
Yeah.
To ask simple questions like, so what? Okay, we've got this information. 34% of people think this. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Does it mean we have a deeper understanding and insight because we have this knowledge? Can it lead to something? Is it an opportunity? Why? Those are really important questions, and they are questions associated with genuine curiosity about the marketplace. We need to understand this better. And so the data we have, what does that mean for us? Yeah. There's a trend, being saying 34%. Well, what was it last year?
So you're talking about the fact that we as businesses, we as business owners need to constantly be asking questions. Now, I'm actually, while you're talking, thinking that a good trait of a marketer then should be curiosity, yes?
Absolutely.
Not some I know it all kind of attitude. I'm not saying that's what marketers like. I'm just talking about individual kind of scenarios. But if a marketer doesn't have the ability to ask questions, or in fact, this is a message to all you marketers out there, if the marketers don't go out and ask questions, that's probably a sign that something ain't right.
And this is getting back to that fundamental idea that we started this discussion with. Yes, one aspect of marketing is all about taking the organization out, communicating effectively, having the right products and services. But another aspect is bringing that in, the understanding of the market and the customers and their problems into the organization and giving other people those insights or exposing other people to those insights so that it can affect their decision-making about products and the way we offer services and the way we interact with customers, etc. And that's, I don't think it's so much an educative role as you could argue that it is. I often thought of myself as a marketing educator within the organization if I was in charge of marketing. That my part of my job was to get other people in the organization to understand what it was like to be a customer. This is where Tanya was talking about the customer journey, the customer experience. And a person in the accounts department, they might not be interested in that, but they still need to have that understanding of what's it like for a customer. Why is that important? Because what you do in accounting will affect, or accounts receivables will affect
the way people think of you,
the way you interact with the customers, and the way people think about your organization. Everyone has a responsibility in an organization to think about what does this mean for the customer.
That's where we get the insights. But if you want to think about it, I think about it as you've got some sort of hunting party or you've got some sort of posse. It's like having a Ford Scout, like someone who goes way ahead and comes back and says, the road up ahead is looking like this.
Fantastic way of thinking.
Yeah, it's like having a Google Maps device and you can look at Google Maps and go, well, I know I'm going this way, and up ahead, you know how it's got the traffic sensors now because it reads everyone's phones and goes, oh, the phones are all bunched up there, must be traffic problems. So you can look and go, well, the road up ahead's got traffic problems. I might need to take this course instead.
I always wondered how they did that.
I think it's because they track your phones, because there's a lot of phones all bunched up, not moving. It's like the cars aren't moving.
Well, see, there's an insight.
I don't know if that's an insight.
Well, no, it is an insight for me. So the other thing about all this is, okay, you've got marketing insights. You've developed them. You've disseminated them to the organization. What do you do with them?
Well, you discuss them for a start.
Absolutely. You use them to help with decision-making within the organization about how you can tailor your offering to better service the customer.
So here's why, another reason. Remember how I talked about at the start about marketing finding its place in a business? That's where those marketing insights, they should be talked about at a board level, not just a board level, but a C level, because that's where the insights have the most value.
Absolutely.
If they're not getting up to that level, they're not getting into that decision-making framework.
That's right. That's right. It should be affecting the way the organization modifies itself over time, changes, to be more effective in servicing the customer. Because that's the reason the organization exists.
I'm working with one company at the moment, and I've mentioned this before, they've decided that client health is really important. And that doesn't mean how healthy the clients are. It means how healthy the relationship is with the provider of the service. I want to encourage everyone who's out there, if you're a business of 5, a business of 10, a business of whatever, you can actually put this into practice just by at your board meeting or at your strategy meeting or your weekly, monthly meeting. You could have, let's say, maybe let's go one question. Let's go the simplest one you can possibly go. We want to ask every customer who comes to us one question, and that is, how'd you hear about us? How'd you find out about us? And then once a month you go, what have we learned this month? How'd they find out about us? That's the very most basic way you can put an insight or create an actual way of realizing insights and actually put them into action. So what I'm getting at is if you have your meeting, whether it be weekly, monthly or whatever, and you say, actually, we want to learn these things. So each week we're going to talk about what conversations we've had with our customers, and you just bring the 3 key things you've learned, Mr. BD person or Mr. Accounts person, and you can do it that way. That's doing it at the very simplest level.
You know, it's interesting that when we were talking about strategic planning before, I go out and help organizations with their strategic plan.
Yes.
And really it's about the process more than anything, about the process of planning. It's not about the document you end up with.
What's the thinking framework that you create?
Yeah.
And I know that because we've done this together.
Yeah. What's interesting is the first time you do it with an organization, it was the first time an organization says, we've got to develop one of these things. Why? Because everybody else has one. Instead of saying, this is really important.
Yeah.
But the first time they do it, there's a sudden realization, there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know.
Yeah.
And always at that point of realization, one of the actions that should be in your planning for the future is, how do we get this information?
Yes.
Not waiting until the next time you revise your plan and go, oh shit, we still don't have that information.
And if you're a larger business, it might be market research, as you talk about before. If you're a smaller business, it might be getting your marketing people to run studies and do surveys and all that bit of it. And if you're a smaller business, it might be just getting your staff to ask your clients a certain question, or just talking about what you've learned just by interacting with clients, making it a part of the conversation.
And as I said before, you've got a whole bunch of data. It's almost inevitable that organizations, no matter how small they are, have data available to them. Looking at that data and asking the question, so what?
Correct.
Yeah, what does this mean?
So as we wrap up, Ron, what are our 3 top tips for everyone who's listening, including ourselves, that we should do to actually make use, to create or to find and make use of insights in our businesses?
Number 1,
Yo.
Be curious. Don't accept that you know it all, like you said before. Don't accept. So that be curious, be looking, be hungry for this information. Number 2 is bring the customer into the organization.
Right.
And make sure that conversation is being had at all levels, but certainly the senior level, at all levels of the organization, to have a program of what insights are we looking for? What information do we need to complete this picture of building our framework of how this market or how these people work?
So start with the end in mind. What do you want to know? So what questions do we need to ask? That's what you're saying. And then organize a way to find that out, whether it's, as we said earlier, to ask your staff or your people to ask a question or just what they're learning around those topics.
And then number 3, do something with it.
So don't just leave it sitting there.
If you've got an insight, it should be affecting the way you modify your offering to be more effective in solving your customer's problem.
So you should write that insight down in some fashion and either have it presented to your board or presented to your management in some way recognizable, because then it enters the thinking. And what's number 3?
Number 3, do something with it.
So don't just leave the data sitting there.
Don't just leave the data sitting there. The insight that you develop should be modifying the way you offer your product to the marketplace.
Okay.
So that you are more effective in solving your customers' problems, whatever they are. But I would argue that when I say use the insight, make sure when you're presenting it to the board that you have not only had the insight, but you've verified that insight.
Okay.
So you might think, oh, we put all this together and this is the insight we have.
So our gut feeling is this, so let's go ask some people if that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an iterative process.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a rigor to define what an insight is for your business.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a supposition that's been proved in some fashion.
And look,
or has evidence to support it.
the smaller the business, the more you can go with those feelings.
Yep.
But certainly as you get bigger, you're spending other people's money. It's not your own. Then you've got to verify using techniques like market research.
So that's really good. And one thing I would say is using those insights can be as simple as, once you know what they are, writing them down and including them in your strategy meetings or your board level meetings or if you're a smaller business, in the discussions you have with your management. So here's what we've learned in the last bit. This is a thing. What are we going to do about that? What do we think? And if it becomes part of the conversation, it starts to get into your head and you might subconsciously act upon it.
Yeah. Documentation is really important. And I say that because as your organization progresses, you need to understand what were we thinking back then? And having those insights written down, those insights will modify over time because your market modifies over time. It changes over time. So being able to say, we did this because this was what we thought about the marketplace. That's now been modified. So what do we do from here? Makes it that much easier to be agile. There's a word that people love to bandy about the place. But being agile means you have a better understanding of the way the market works or your organization performs in the market than anybody else. And being nimble about that means that we can change quickly because we have that understanding.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in today's environment, we've got to be able to adapt quickly. So look, that's a great episode, Ron. Really good conversation. And I think I found that useful, even in some of the things that we discussed. And we really hope that everyone who's listening found it useful. So we will be back in a couple of weeks with our next episode. We don't exactly know what's coming up yet. We're starting to get into new territory. We're going to move away from marketing for a while.
Yes.
Because I think we've cooked marketing from a few different angles. So if people listening don't think it's important at the moment, we've failed, Ron.
Oh, absolutely. But I also would love to hear about the type of marketing topics that people would still like to have covered. Because you could go on forever.
You'd like to find out some insights from our audience.
That would be fantastic.
Look at what we just did there. So we would love to hear from you. We know that some of you have reached out to us on places like LinkedIn. So that's a great place to do it. Hit us up, post some stuff in our channel or just direct message us. We'd love to hear what you think, what you'd like to hear coming up. And we will bring you an update in 2 weeks' time.
So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. See you soon.